Hey everyone, thanks for checking out this short episode here. Now, it's important to me that we have transparency of context whenever we're getting information from someone, especially the kinds of information that I'm sharing, where I'm sharing experiences, opinions, making claims, coming to conclusions, and defending and advancing certain ideas and ideologies, some of which might be unusual or new. So I wanted to spend a few minutes to give you a short rundown of some of my background so that you can understand where I'm coming from in all of the episodes here. Quick version, the 1 minute, 30-second version, is that I was elected as a non party affiliated mayor of my hometown in New Jersey, South Orange, when I was 23 in 2011. I've been a municipal business administrator or town manager in two towns, primarily focusing on strategic planning around finances and the budget. I teach a core credit MPA course in Seton Hall University's Master of Public Administration program, and am currently a consultant primarily in management, administration, finance, communications, technology, a mentor, and a speaker, and previously an entrepreneur, founding my own consulting company, Veracity Media, and even a tennis business way back in the day in high school. I've served as a municipal emergency management director, including during Hurricane Irene and Hurricane Sandy, and I volunteered about 4,000 hours as an emergency medical technician. I've traveled and worked in a lot of parts of the state. I've moved around a bunch in the country and the world. And I really enjoy kind of getting out into communities and learning what they're all about and helping them solve their problems. And beyond that, I enjoy reading and writing, debating philosophy or, is New Jersey great or the greatest? An argument I've gotten into many times. Or spending time outdoors or riding my motorcycle off into the sunset. Actually, it's probably more likely the sunrise. Okay, so that's the 1 minute version. And let me give you the 10-minute version here if you're interested in a little bit more context and a little bit more of some of the things that I've worked on, some of the things that make me tick. So I think the best way to do this is chronologically. So I'm going to start in high school, but I'm going to really just cover some, high level points here. Okay, so I wasn't actually that politically active when I was much younger. I was mostly interested in science, in music, and in playing competitive tennis, which I played but was also the source of most of my work when I was younger. So when I was 14, I started working at a tennis club. I was a groundskeeper, so I cleaned the bathrooms and locker rooms in the club and got the courts ready for everything in the morning. But then I also started my own business, I think when I was 15, called The Tennis Guru, where I strung rackets, taught tennis lessons, and sold tennis stuff. Did a lot of kind of e-commerce online with that too. Now, towards the junior or senior year in high school, there was a sort of confluence of events that happened that maybe I'll go into in more details in another episode, but they sort of pushed me or they prompted me in the direction that I'm on now, which is sort of this public policy, politics, and things like that. And actually, it was originally a little more focused on journalism. And in the past, I wrote for my newspaper in high school and in college and in South Orange before I ran for office. Now, when I was in high school, I started a small online forum to encourage people to talk about different political issues. I wanted to create some debate and a space for debate around those things. And around that same time, I started thinking about going to college to study these sorts of issues, rather than trying to play D1 tennis or, get like a really great D3 tennis scholarship somewhere if I could get it. Now, I started getting involved in town a little bit at this point. There was an issue with these tennis courts, and the tennis community in South Orange is unique. You can't really understand it unless you see it, but it's an incredibly diverse community of people that use these courts. It's an entire cultural place in and of itself. And the town wasn't really being great about something. They were sort of sneaking a change through that a resident learned about and mobilized the community to kind of organize against. The short story is they were basically going to remove a couple of the courts, which are often filled during peak times. They were going to remove a couple of the courts, and the justification was they needed the exit driveway to be wider for emergency vehicles to meet the fire code. But, after looking up the codes online and going out and measuring things, myself and a handful of others kind of presented to the town that they actually didn't need to do that and things could work under code as they were. So we were able to stop that from happening. And that was kind of my first taste of getting involved, protecting this really valuable and diverse cultural asset in town. So I go off to college, Hampshire College in Western Massachusetts, and I went there for a very specific reason. If you aren't familiar with Hampshire, it's a very DIY, a do-it-yourself school. There's no grades, and you have to create your own major after your first year, and basically design your entire course of study throughout your time at the school. And in your final year, you complete one project throughout the whole year. Now, I spent, as you can probably imagine, all 4 years on the student government, spent the last two as the president of it and the chair of a student government body between the 5 colleges in the area. So that was Hampshire, Amherst, UMass Amherst, Smith, and Mount Holyoke. I set up a work-study program between Hampshire College and the Amherst Police Department to help study racial profiling, and was involved in basically anything and everything I could kind of get my hands on campus. In addition to throwing some really historically epic parties with lots of live music, which I am also very proud of. Now, my final year, my Div 3, as Hampshire calls it, was a 200-page project that I spent over a year writing. That was a draft of a book about the alcohol policy and drinking age. I won a small grant in Hampshire for that project, helping explain technical or scientific information to broad audiences. Now, I'm actually currently revisiting that work, and we'll be doing lots of podcast episodes about it and how it relates to mental health and drug policy, and a whole bunch of other issues, including a really problematic rise of sexual violence on college campuses, and some other really serious problems. So keep an eye out for those episodes. Now, after college, I moved back to South Orange. Having gotten a very small taste of emergency medicine at Hampshire and public safety services, I also worked for the Department of Public Safety at Hampshire. I was amazed Hampshire had a student EMT program. And we threw these really giant kind of ragers at Hampshire, but they were all really responsible. We always took care of people if for some reason someone was hurt or potentially sick. And the school was very supportive of all of that. People didn't get in trouble. They just got medical attention. And I thought it was really cool that there were people around who were just EMTs and they just sort of knew what to do. So when I came back, I got involved in South Orange's community emergency response team, which was interesting, but not really enough. And then I joined the rescue squad. I got my EMT certification in New Jersey, and I volunteered over 4,000 hours there as a emergency medical technician. At this time, I also joined our public library board in South Orange and worked on some kind of cool technology and local history projects. And I went to basically every town meeting that I could get to. I wrote a column called Tea Time with Torpy for our local newspaper, and I think you can actually find all those articles online on an old blog of mine. It was mostly about technology, civics, governance, and media, but you can see a little bit about what I was thinking 10 or 11 years ago on these topics. And at this time, I was trying to grow my company. I was doing some consulting and web design, but really wanted to grow Veracity Media. And I also knew I wanted to get more involved in South Orange. And so in 2010, I started thinking about running for office, either as a council member, which we call the Board of Trustees, or mayor, which we call village president. Now, I have an episode where I talk about some South Orange stuff, so I'm not going to repeat all of that here. It's kind of too big of a can of worms to open. Now, also around this time, I had started getting my MPA degree at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. So I was getting my Master of Public Administration in Emergency Management. So I was going to school there at nights in the city. I graduated a few years later and actually then was hired as an adjunct at John Jay a couple of years after that. Okay, so I ran for office in South Orange, put this kind of scrappy campaign together from scratch, and I was kind of lucky because South Orange has nonpartisan May elections, and I've never been affiliated with a political party, either as a voter or as a political candidate or a political person. So I ran on my own. Everybody else in the election was already elected to office in town. Now, fast forward past lots of stuff that I'll share more about in other episodes, I won that election in a landslide of 12 votes. Yep, that's right, 12 votes. And so at 23 years old, I became one of the youngest mayors in the United States for a town with 20,000 people and about a $33 million budget. Now, throughout my time in office, I worked a lot on issues around public engagement, technology, public safety, finance, and the environment, arts and culture, and our downtown. And you can find a bunch about South Orange and stuff we did in South Orange at alextorpy.com/South Orange. Now, throughout this time also, I grew my company with 2 partners to a really legitimate consulting shop where we worked on dozens of political campaigns and nonprofit campaigns around the country and even abroad. We worked with local races, state legislative races, governor's race, a U.S. Senate race, a number of congressional races, and a number of large nonprofits as well. We worked with a couple pretty big companies, Airbnb, Simon & Schuster, and a couple others. Now, we were a nonpartisan firm, but on the political side, we were often working with people that were challenging incumbents. We started mostly helping people do communications and digital media and moved into doing broader campaign management and organizational management and consulting, helping some nonprofits like Campaign for Free College Tuition to actually kind of get off the ground. And along with a couple other folks, started a nonprofit called Rethink Leadership that was aimed at helping tell the stories of some of the new young leaders out there and help encourage other people to do the same, something that I have really spent a lot of time on over the years. Now, I also served as South Orange's emergency management coordinator, and we had quite a few storms during that time period, including Irene and Sandy. It really put my MPA to use, but really frightening and valuable and interesting layer onto that entire experience. I volunteered at the rescue squad throughout my time in office, which also provided some really interesting touch points. For example, when we were responded to a person who was the victim of an armed robbery, and we're sitting in the back of the ambulance, and I'm asking their medical history, and they answer me, and they, say, no medications, Mayor. I gave that person, my card, and we met in my office hours the next day to talk more about their concerns about crime in town. Now, I put my last day of my term in my Google Calendar before I got sworn in. I had no plan in running for a second term, and was actually able to derive a lot of power in helping shape things by not being constrained by those sorts of dynamics, something I talk a lot about in other episodes. So I finished up my term, which included getting 3 new council members to replace 3 who were really not contributing that constructively. And one of those 3 who got elected is the mayor now, the second youngest, and the first female, which is really cool. So my term ended May of 2015, and the next day there was a storm. And the day after that, I hopped on my motorcycle and turned my phone off and went to upstate New York. I then spent a couple months traveling, first hanging out in Spain with friends, and then spending about 2 months studying and working on governance, media, election, and community development issues in Rwanda and Uganda. Now, I came back, and myself and my other partner ended up selling most of our interests and left full-time with our company. And I started doing some really interesting consulting. For example, creating the Pathways for America program with Run for America, which is a really interesting, nonpartisan leadership development program built on some really cool methodologies that helped encourage people to run for office and included hundreds of people from all around the country with different partisan and demographic backgrounds. I talk about that in some other episodes, too. And then I went into municipal administration. I set aside a specific 3 or 4 year period where not only did I want to make a real salary for the first time in my life and get health benefits for the first time in my life, but to dig another layer down into why government doesn't work the way it should or could, and why it's so freaking expensive and poorly performing in New Jersey specifically. So I wanted to get in there day to day, roll up my sleeves, and actually understand what was going on. And I think I got the opportunity to do that. I worked in 2 different towns, one Leonia in Bergen County, kind of right outside New York City, and the other Lambertville in Hunterdon County down in central Jersey near the Delaware River. And, what I did in these positions focused in a couple different areas. One, I would call like revenue positive financial forecasting and planning. The other, transparent local budgeting, compliance, records retention, and ethics. And then a bunch of areas of programs that were kind of specifically, tailored to meet community needs. So what do those things mean? Revenue positive financial planning. The problem with a lot of government budgeting is that they are only doing the budget in the year that they are passing the budget at best. In New Jersey, it's actually even worse than a lot of other places because take a calendar year like 2021, a government is doing its 2021 budget. It's adopting that budget in April or maybe May of that year. So already half the year is basically gone, and people are really only looking at the ground right in front of them. They're not looking out farther ahead than that. And what that means is that a lot of the budgeting is without any context. People don't know where things are going in the future. And so bringing all that information together is really important. And so things like your ratable base and whether you project growth or decline in that, your revenue, your non-tax revenue that you earn from fees, fines, permits, your projected growth or decline in that, affordable housing obligations, anticipated legal expenses, retirements, contractual salary increases, facility conditions, infrastructure investments, There are so many different things that you have to really add up here, costs that are in your control and outside of your control. And a big one is debt that a lot of towns aren't really thinking about. And so they submit these sort of, like paltry, quote unquote, capital plans in their budget document that don't actually really outline any of their projected capital spending. And it makes it really easy for towns to borrow money and sort of sneak that by the taxpayers who don't really understand how much they're borrowing and how that's going to impact them. So Lambertville is a good example. In 2019, 24% of the operating budget was going towards debt service. So that means a quarter of the budget was going towards paying debt that had already been borrowed. If they continued spending at the prior spending levels and prior borrowing levels, that number would have been 38% just 5 years later. So within about 5 years, almost half of the entire budget was going to just go towards paying credit card bills, basically. It's really not sustainable. But somehow the governing body didn't know that. The public didn't know that. And so part of my job was to get all of those stakeholders kind of involved in that process and looking 6 years out. And so we could use information about the future to make decisions in the present. Kind of a revolutionary idea, although it really shouldn't be. And the revenue positive part of that is that it was really important to me that I cost taxpayers nothing in my position as a business administrator. And in both towns, I was able to be net positive pretty significantly. Over a 6 year period of measuring out savings and revenue generations, it's in the millions of dollars a net positive. And that's through bringing in new grants, cutting spending, reducing the amount of debt authorized, and finding revenue in other areas, doing shared services, things like that. Now, both of all of that needs to be done, and this is the second point, with the public fully informed and engaged in that. And so bringing department heads and staff into the process, presenting all that information publicly, making sure the council and all the elected officials really understand the budget, produced a lot of presentations, spreadsheets, videos, walkthroughs, FAQs, all sorts of things to try and make sure that everybody in the community who wanted to understand the budget could, and that we would be as proactive as possible there, and that theoretically everybody's on the same page with the decisions that the municipality is making. Next was like compliance and records retention ethics. This is something that's really frustrating because it's really important, but it is really not respected, certainly not in most local governments in New Jersey. You have a lot of elected officials who, for whatever reason, don't feel like they have to follow those rules. Those rules don't apply to them. And so there's loopholes and they sneak around the Open Public Records Act and Open Public Meetings Act in a way that's not consistent with the intent of those laws. And so that was something that, honestly, I just did not tolerate in those workplaces, and really tried to get those things all set up better, put better records retention policies in place, ensure that our attorney was, making sure that elected officials were following the rules, all that kind of stuff was really, really important, while making, advocating, both of the Oprah and OTMA in New Jersey both need changes, but we still have to follow the laws, especially in the meantime. And then the last piece is really broad, but is just, doing programs that benefit the community and respond to community needs. A lot of this was about public information and engagement, technology adoption, sustainability, preservation of open space, support of downtown businesses. There's a lot of different categories here. So a couple cool ones, in Leonia, we won, in thanks part to a grant. We put the first fully electric plug-in police vehicle on the road in New Jersey. That was a community relations vehicle that was replacing a really old and Chevy Suburban and an Army surplus AM General Hummer. We also expanded space for senior citizens, did a bunch of website and technology projects, did some redevelopment work, streamlined how we did purchasing. In Lambertville, we started to move all of the online permitting 311 processes from paper processes to online. So homeowners, businesses could do licensing, permitting fully online, pay for them online, and the whole process could be done electronically. No need to, visit the municipal building, wait days for things to come back. We also did some really cool shared services that we started and got some grant funding from the state, which I hope they continue to work on. Finished a new website, and really cut out some really crazy frivolous spending in some of the capital areas with some of the professionals that were contracted there. And this is just a little bit of the areas that I got to work on, as a municipal administrator. And you can read a little more about that on the website at rethinkingwithalextorpy.com if you are curious. And beyond that, I learned a lot about myself, who I wanted to be, who I didn't want to be, and how I wanted to engage with this really problematic system. This kind of system, not just of the people who run for office, but this kind of entire cultural dynamic, especially in New Jersey, that really keeps things the same way and isn't really providing any support for thinking about doing things differently, which is pretty clear from the outcomes we see around us, something that we really need to take more seriously. Now, at this point, I had been teaching in Seton Hall's MPA program for about 7 years, which has been really, really cool, getting to see the kind of next generation and support the next generation of young administrators. And I've continued to do consulting throughout this time period. For example, I've recently, as I'm recording this, finished up a project with Sustainable Jersey that was the Public Information Engagement Technology Assessment, which you can also read about on my website, and I have a podcast episode about. Right now, I'm really excited to be stepping back and organizing a lot of the lessons and experiences and knowledge and best practices from all of this, not managing the day-to-day, but working on some more creative projects and getting all of this information organized and available in more kind of accessible formats for different types of stakeholders. Throughout this whole time, I've taken a lot of classes online, attended dozens upon dozens of workshops and conferences, continuing ed events in areas that span from governance to administration and finance management, to philosophy, to neuroscience and consciousness, technology, astronomy, economics, politics, history, so much more. I love learning and also love educating and the back and forth that comes from being in the right kind of environment. That's a lot of what I hope to create in this series. In this time, I also got to travel a bunch. I did not fly for many years, something maybe I'll share more about in another episode, but ended up doing a lot around this country, a little bit in Ireland, in Costa Rica, in East Africa, in Canada, and all across the more than a dozen, I think almost 24 states across the U.S. And like really digging into these issues with people in different communities and understanding what people are about and sort of the consciousness of a community. Now, when I'm not doing these things, I also really enjoy hiking and camping and fishing. I'm trying to learn how to fly fish. If anybody has any advice, please send it over. I also really love photography and music, both listening to it and slowly learning to play guitar. I've been, I'm not sure I'm a drummer, but I've played drums for many years. So that's a little bit about me. Shoot me a message on social media or by email. Let me know a little bit about yourself. I'd love to get to know, my audience the same way that you all get to know me. So you can contact me at alex@rethinkingwithalextorpy.com. You can also find me on Instagram or Twitter or LinkedIn or Facebook and reach out to me there. So appreciate you listening to this and learning a little bit about my context here. You can learn more online about some of these things if you want to. And again, reach out to me if you have any questions about everything. And I look forward to getting to know all of you over the course of this series as well. Hey everyone, Alex here. If you want to find show notes, sources, and more information, you can do so in the YouTube description or online on my website at rethinkingwithalextorpy.com. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me with any questions or feedback at alex@rethinkingwithalextorpy.com or on social media. And if you liked what you heard, please consider leaving a positive review, subscribing, liking, or sharing this episode with a friend. Thanks again for listening.